with our lively chats about politics
and social media investigations.
Navigate your way to Election Day and beyond.
With Americast, a BBC podcast. Listen on BBC Sounds.
When the weather can't make up its mind, we can help you make up yours. Check on the BBC Weather app.
Tonight at 10, more than 200 people are known to have died in the floods in eastern Spain. Dozens are still missing. Firefighters search the wreckage of cars concertinaed by the sheer force of the water.
Our local government didn't do anything about it, knowing they well knew that this was coming and did nothing about it.
Local people have mobilised, creating an army of volunteers to help with the clean-up. Also tonight, the murder of 15-year-old Holly Newton. Her teenage ex-boyfriend is jailed for life.
We're live in Arizona, beside the giant border wall separating the US and Mexico, with just 4 days to go before the presidential election. Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are campaigning hard in the handful of key swing states. They must win.
So they just walk over here and they're in the United States and just walk right through.
And I've been hearing from voters here on the southern border, worried about illegal migration, a major issue in the election campaign.
And from Portugal to Manchester, Sporting Lisbon's 39-year-old Ruben Amorim is Man United's new head coach.
On Newsnight at 10:30 tonight, we'll bring you fresh insight on the stories of the day with big interviews and our regular panel of Newsnighters. And of course, look at what the papers are saying about tomorrow's news.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to the BBC News at 10. More than 200 people are known to have died in the flash floods in eastern Spain, and dozens are still missing, 3 days after the deadliest flood-related disaster in Europe since the 1970s. This evening, the Spanish authorities have extended a red alert for torrential rain on the country's southern coast over the weekend. Thousands of volunteers have joined the military and emergency services in the Valencia region to help with rescue and the clean-up operation. Mark Lowen reports now from Valencia.
Beneath the mangled scrap heap, the painful question, could it be hiding yet more dead? They picked their way through what turned from tunnel to death trap. Each day, new bodies found. With tragedy comes an army of solidarity, communities stunned by Spain's worst natural disaster in its modern history. How do you even begin to clean up when the calamity keeps deepening? For volunteers, it's overwhelming.
People that are not here have gone through a terrible agony until the time that, they passed away. And anger, because it's outrageous that, our local government didn't do anything about it, knowing they well knew that, this was coming.
When the floods came, they shattered what lay in their path. Cars, homes, lives. A year's worth of rainfall in 8 hours. Juan Perez inspects what's left of his house, just one of those that the water tore through.
All my life, my memories, my parents lived there, and now overnight, it's all gone in 5 minutes.
The fear now is that many of the missing will be found underground as rescuers flush out the water. The horrors slowly retrieved, those trapped in car parks and garages as the flooding rose around them. In Aldaya, outside Valencia, firefighters are stretched to their limit, locals pitching in a desperate attempt to clear what they can.
Well, this was just one of the rivers that burst its banks, with the torrents of water and mud engulfing everything in its wake. And this is a scene that is repeated right across this region. What's also repeated is the growing sense of abandonment, the feeling that we're hearing from many people here, that in the absence of the authorities, they're having to depend on one another.
We found a shop owned by Amparo Andres. She's had it for 40 years. It was lost in an instant.
The water rose and came up to my neck, she says. I had the feeling my life was ending. At least I'm alive, but I've lost everything. My business, my home. And the government isn't doing anything. Only the young people around are helping us.
Amidst the sadness, anger is rising here too, at local authorities that only sounded the alarm when the flooding had already started. Messages sent to phones of people who had no chance to escape. Tonight, the volunteers headed home to prepare for tomorrow's grim ritual. Clearing, discovering, mourning. Mark Lowen, BBC News, Valencia.
Well, the extent of the devastation is clear. Many of the people who died were in the suburb of Paiporta, 5 miles from Valencia. And we can see from this satellite image how badly the area was hit. This was taken 2 weeks ago. And this is what those streets, fields and roads looked like yesterday, covered in a thick layer of mud, and the bridge in the middle of the picture there destroyed by the floods. People who lived there complain that they had no warning of what was coming their way. This was a street in that town at 7:17 on Tuesday evening. By 7:33, traffic is building up in the street, and then just 5 minutes later, as cars are backing up, the water is visible in the distance. And we can see what happens just 2 minutes later. At 7:40, the whole street is underwater, with cars stuck in a traffic jam. People have no idea what's happening or what they should do. 10 minutes later, at 10:08, we have frozen that image, so you can see there the force of the water as cars start being swept off the road. It wasn't until 8 o'clock that residents got their first emergency phone alert telling them not to leave home. But by then, the streets were deluged. Well, let's turn to Mark Lowen, who is in Valencia tonight. And Mark, there is anger, isn't there, about warnings, whether they were too late, whether they were there at all.
Yeah, absolutely, Jane. Spain is still in 3 days of national mourning, so the political reckoning is on hold. But many people here feel that it will come, and indeed should come, because last Friday, Spain's state weather service was already forecasting the flooding on Tuesday. By Monday morning, they'd issued a maximum red alert, but it is up to the regional authorities to interpret that alert and warn people through mobile phone messages. Those only came at 8 p.m. on Tuesday night, by which time buildings were already inundated. The regional president was holding a press conference on Tuesday lunchtime saying that the intensity of the storm would decrease by that night. He insists that all the correct protocols were followed. Now, Jane, this was clearly an extreme weather event that many scientists believe was exacerbated by climate change, but I think that there will be real questions moving forward over why and how Valencia was so ill prepared.
Mark, thank you. Mark Lowen tonight in Valencia. Now, voters go to the polls on Tuesday in the US to choose a president, all members of the House of Representatives and a third of the upper house, the Senate, as well as local races. Clive is there in the run-up to polling day and joins us now from Arizona. Clive.
Yeah, hi there, Jane. Welcome to the US-Mexico frontier. We're high above the border city of Nogales, just down in the valley there. The border wall courses all the way to my left. Over there is Mexico. Over here is the United States. And the race for the presidency, it is hotting up between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump as it enters its final weekend. More than 66 million votes have already been cast as both candidates target those crucial swing states, and including Wisconsin today. Both candidates have been there. The latest polls, they continue to show a very tight race indeed, with Kamala Harris's early lead now down to around a single point. That's in an average of the polls, as you can see here. But it's the 7 key swing battleground states that they've got to focus on that will decide the election. All the other states, we pretty much know how they're going to vote. So let's go to one of those swing states. Sarah Smith, our North America editor, is live in Kenosha in Wisconsin for us now. Sarah.
Yeah, Clive, there is a real spat developing today over remarks that Donald Trump made about aiming guns at one of his political opponents. As she arrived in Wisconsin, Kamala Harris said it shows that he's unfit to be president. And that's just the latest in a campaign that has been driven by anger and fear. As Election Day approaches, Donald Trump is ratcheting up his violent rhetoric. He's been threatening opponents throughout this campaign. Now he's taking aim at one of his biggest critics, former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney.
She's a radical war hawk. Let's put her with a rifle standing there with 9 barrels shooting at her, okay? Let's see how she feels about it. You know, when the guns are trained on her face.
Anyone who wants to be president of the United States who uses that kind of violent rhetoric is clearly disqualified and unqualified to be president.
This campaign is increasingly characterized by anger and driven by fear.
They've allowed this country to be poisoned.
Donald Trump is increasingly unstable.
We're a dumping ground. We're like a garbage can.
And now in more than 20 states, we have Trump abortion bans.
Now, Halloween is supposed to be scary, as well as fun. Door County in Wisconsin takes trick-or-treating seriously. And elections too, voting for the presidential winner in every recent contest. This year, voters feel like they're being presented with a frightening choice.
We're looking at a democracy that it may no longer be that way. Like is he going to give up his power? He said, just vote for me just this once and you'll never have to vote again. What does that mean? We're not voting again? I don't know. It's terrifying.
Can you envisage how you would feel if you woke up and discovered that Donald Trump had won the election?
Oh my God, I will be throwing up.
Republicans are scared too. Heather Socek is going to vote for Donald Trump for the 3rd time. She's worried about the economy if he loses, but also about the fear tactics both candidates employ.
I feel like they are making us live in fear, no matter how you spin it. Like some of us are working 2 to 3 jobs and not getting a lot of that family time because, we have to put food on the table. And so I do believe that they're making us live in fear just to get our vote.
The apocalyptic warnings coming from both candidates about what could happen to America are making voters feel as though this election is an existential event that could have disastrous consequences if their side doesn't win. Fear and loathing may be the way to win an election, but it will not help unite a country that's divided like never before. Sarah Smith, BBC News, Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin.
Yeah, the key issues there in one of those battleground swing states. Arizona's another one, and it borders Mexico for hundreds of miles, coursing all the way down to my left there. And the state has become a focal point for the national debate on illegal immigration. It's a major election issue here in the minds of voters, as I've been finding out. On the Arizona-Mexico border, you've got to have your wits about you.
I just pulled it out and then just loaded it. And as soon as they heard the sound, they all kind of just backed off a little bit.
Illegal immigration is one of the defining issues of the presidential election.
So they just walk over here and they're in the United States and just walk right through.
Walk right through onto your land?
Yes.
But which candidate?
We're like a garbage can for the rest of the world.
Is best equipped
Do not come. Do not come.
to allay the fears of millions of voters who feel a broken border represents a broken America?
It's a soul-crushing place to be, to watch this immigration problem over and over, year after year.
On America's southern border, the cowboys have their work cut out. Stephen Clark Morales not only has to corral cattle, but he must be ever watchful on his family's 11,000-acre Arizona ranch. Everything on that side is your land, right?
Well, both sides are part of our property.
For illegal migrants crossing the border. He's always armed, just in case.
They'll hide under here and sleep under the trees like this to hide from the helicopter or anything patrolling over the top.
One night, he was cornered by a group of men.
How many were there?
I would assume probably like 15 people.
So you couldn't have taken them on your own?
No. Told them to back up. They kept coming and asking for water, and I told them, okay, just back up, back up. And at that moment, they kind of like hunched forward and came at me, and I backed into the car and grabbed the gun and just loaded it. And once I loaded it, they heard that, and the guy kind of backed up, and from there, they disbanded.
This man couldn't walk away. Stephen discovered him on his land.
He looked kind of banged up on the leg and on his face.
He was injured, was he?
Yeah, he was injured on his foot.
He'd escaped a gang beating in Mexico and crossed the border, having run for his life.
He said that they caught him and that they smashed his leg with the bat and that they ran over his head. When they did that, he just got up and took off running, and it was dark, and they couldn't find him, they couldn't see him, and that they were chasing him for miles on a mile's end, and somehow he made it to my house.
So many illegal migrants reaching America are escaping the drug cartels in their own lands. The almost 400-mile-long frontier between Arizona and Mexico represents a ribbon of fierce passions cutting across this election.
They're poisoning the blood of our country. That's what they've done. They poison mental institutions and prisons all over the world, not just in South America, not just the 3 or 4 countries that we think about, but all over the world. They're coming into our country.
Migrant numbers did rise sharply under Joe Biden, and Donald Trump knows disquiet over a broken border feeds a general sense that America is broken too, and only he can fix it.
She took on drug cartels and jailed gang members for...
Kamala Harris has now woken up to the deep-seated fears in the heart of Americans and is getting tough on migration too.
And as president, she will hire thousands more border agents and crack down on fentanyl and human trafficking.
But is it too late for her campaign? And what's the best way for a candidate to show they get it? Build a big wall.
All of a sudden, in this part of Arizona, the border wall, well, it just suddenly stops. Donald Trump says, give me another 4 years, I'm going to keep it going that way. Kamala Harris has also signed on to building new sections of wall. The big question, will that really solve America's migrant crisis?
Meanwhile, back on Stephen's ranch, he knows how to impress his 70-year-old mum.
This is a Mother's Day gift.
It's a pump action.
Yes, it is.
Oh, my Lord. And that was a Mother's Day gift, did you say?
Yes, Mother's Day gift. Yes, because I'm here alone a lot, and when I've got a gang member or somebody that's pounding on my door.
An illegal migrant, you mean?
Yeah, well, in that case, it was, yes, an illegal migrant that is trying to break in. I can protect myself.
The shotgun, part of an arsenal of weapons. That's life on the frontier.
It's life on the frontier.
Necessary, says Susie, because no politician has truly bothered to deal with illegal migration.
It's painful to see what goes on out there. It's painful when the people come here hurt, beaten. One guy was stabbed, half naked, women that are raped. It's traumatizing to witness it, and it's disgusting to see it keep going on and on and on until the countries of origin are able to support their people and feed them and give them opportunities. That wall isn't going to make any difference. They'll still keep coming. It's a soul-crushing place to be, to watch this immigration problem over and over, year after year.
Yeah, Susie was amazing, formidable woman. I wouldn't mess with her. I should say that she told me she voted for Donald Trump last time round. This time, she's probably not going to vote for either of the candidates. Well, that's it from us here on the US-Mexico border. Katie Razzle has more on the US election over on Newsnight on BBC Two now at 10:30. Katie, over to you.
Yes, Clive, it's a busy news night tonight as we interview one of Donald Trump's most high-profile supporters about their end-of-campaign strategy. Plus, the top election official in the swing state of Georgia who defied Trump at the last election tells us about the death threats and his fears this time. That's Newsnight on BBC Two, BBC News and iPlayer. Jane.
Katie, thank you. Here, a teenage boy who stalked and killed 15-year-old Holly Newton after she ended their relationship has been jailed for life with a minimum term of 17 years. Logan McPhail was 16 when he followed his ex-girlfriend for an hour before stabbing her to death in an alleyway in Hexham in Northumberland last year. The judge said the dignity and forbearance shown by Holly's family in court had honoured her memory. This report from Alison Freeman contains distressing details.
These are the moments Holly Newton was last seen alive. The 15-year-old had repeatedly told Logan McPhail, seen here walking into an alleyway, that their relationship was over. Holly, who was 15, hesitates, but eventually her killer lures her in too. McPhail, who was 16 at the time, then launched an attack on her that was so brutal and sustained that the knife he was using broke. A boy who heard Holly's screams and tried to save her was also stabbed. Today, the 17-year-old was jailed for life and told he must serve a minimum of 17 years for her murder.
Holly was a child. Although you were not an adult, she was no match for you, armed with a knife. She had severe injuries as she sought to defend herself from the knife. She must have realized before she died, I'm afraid, that she was fighting for her life.
Throughout the trial, McPhail had claimed he couldn't remember attacking Holly and that he'd been carrying a knife for more than a week because he planned to hurt himself and not her, something he told police officers at the scene.
She's been too horrible to me, and last night was actually meant to kill myself. I was meant to kill myself, so I went too far.
But the judge said he had repeatedly lied. CCTV released today showed he'd been stalking her. The night before he killed her, he took a bus to her hometown of Haltwhistle in Northumberland, where he waited for hours in the freezing cold. The next day, he left school early, took a bus more than 20 miles to Hexham, where he covered his face whilst he followed Holly. Cameras picked him up hiding in a supermarket car park. In court, he said he'd learned about stalking people whilst attending army cadets. He followed Holly for 45 minutes before the attack took place. The judge said today he'd been driven by resentment and jealousy. McPhail was jailed for 17 years for Holly's murder, but the judge said no sentence could undo what he'd done to his former girlfriend. Alison Freeman, BBC News, Newcastle Crown Court.
Thousands of children have been killed and injured in Gaza in the last year, caught up in a war they didn't start. Last week, a BBC producer saw a photograph of a group of Palestinian men who'd been detained by Israeli forces in Jabalia in the north of the territory. In amongst them was one very young girl. Our special correspondent Fergal Keane wondered what had happened to her. Israel doesn't allow the BBC and other international media to enter Gaza and report independently, but with the help of local journalists inside Gaza, he tried to find out.
They were ordered to leave. The men made to strip to be searched, some of them elderly, as the Israeli army hunted for weapons and anyone linked to Hamas. But look to the left, in the crowd, a small child, facing away from the scene. Who was she? What became of her? Julia Abu Warda, 3.5 years old. These photos were taken before the encounter at the Israeli checkpoint, before the order to go. Our colleague found Julia in Gaza City, 1 week after the photograph was taken, but with the family's memories still vivid.
There were soldiers on the tanks and soldiers on the ground. They approached the people and started firing above their heads. People were pushing against each other during the shooting.
They were escaping the hell of Jabalia, a landscape in which human survival is becoming impossible.
We saw destruction and bodies scattered on the ground. They were pointing their guns at us and ordering us to stay seated. It was very bad.
In Gaza, it's not so much that children grow old before their time. It is that time stands still. They're trapped, each day like the one before, the trauma accumulating. Julia's 7-year-old cousin was killed by an Israeli drone strike in the street where he played.
It used to be normal. She would run and play. But now, whenever there's shelling, she points and says, "Plane!" She looks up and points out the drone flying over us.
It's hard to call Julia lucky in a place like this. But she is fortunate in the family that holds her close. Fergal Keane, BBC News, Jerusalem.
Here, the government has suggested that higher employer national insurance contributions to be paid by GP practices will be taken into consideration when contracts are renegotiated later this year. GPs had expressed concerns about the impact of the tax increase, but the Department for Health pointed to the £22 billion of extra funding announced in this week's budget and said it will ensure that practices have the resources they need to offer patients what they called the highest quality care. Manchester United have appointed a new head coach, 39-year-old Ruben Amorim from Portugal, who's currently in that role at Sporting Lisbon. United describe him as one of the most exciting and highly rated young coaches in European football. He'll start his new job later this month after Erik ten Hag was sacked on Monday. Hugh Ferris reports.
On Monday, it was the end of Erik ten Hag, but by the end of the week, a new man for Manchester United. Calling him one of the most exciting and highly rated young coaches in European football, the Premier League club said they were delighted to announce the appointment of Ruben Amorim as head coach of the men's first team. He will join until June 2027 with the option for a further year.
He's bringing a bit of hope and excitement back to this club and trying to bring this club back to the top where it belongs.
They ain't going to challenge the title as soon as Amorim comes in. Everybody knows that.
By 2028, new minority owners Ineos want the club to be champions again, and they'll hope Amorim can deliver the same as at Sporting, winning the title after a long wait.
He's focused 100%. He stayed more time right now in Sporting, more time in academia than in his house with his family. I'm sure 100% that he will have the same success that he had in Portugal, he will have in England.
Not 40 until January, Amorim will become one of the youngest men to lead Manchester United since Sir Matt Busby. What the fans would give for something even approaching the success of Sir Matt's era. 20 years after the Premier League's first Portuguese manager announced himself as the special one, its seventh might need to be magnificent for Manchester United. Hugh Ferris, BBC News.
Now, we'll talk a little bit more about the US election because as part of our coverage, we're travelling across America with Radio 1 Newsbeat, talking to first-time voters about what's important to them. Political reporter Jordan Kenny started his road trip in Georgia, followed by North Carolina, and tonight reports from Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania, another of the 7 swing states where the battle for the White House will be won or lost. In 2020, Pennsylvania was won by Joe Biden by 82,000 votes. Both sides have been campaigning hard here. This time, it's the state where Donald Trump survived the first assassination attempt and Elon Musk has been giving out cash to prospective voters. So, how are young voters feeling? Here's Jordan's report.
Kicking off this leg of the trip in a cable car down to Pittsburgh. Although all Americans are feeling the pressure of inflation, it's thought the price of groceries has risen faster in Pennsylvania than anywhere else. This state's the birthplace of some of the biggest pop stars in the world, like Taylor Swift and Pink.
Are you ready for some non-stop Broadway spectacular?
So how are local singers coping with the rising cost of living?
I bought a small starter home that was like a total fixer-upper in 2017. I've seen house prices essentially double.
Rosina and her boyfriend Corey are feeling the pinch.
And so, yeah, the finances of the country and the cost of living is just brutal.
Kamala Harris all the way.
For students, Journey and Jordan, it's not just the cost of groceries on their minds.
A big part of me is like college debt and housing and payments and prices, because our generation have only known the climate crisis and prices spiking high.
Right, I just went to Dunkin' Donuts the other day and my order was 5 something, and maybe 2 or 3 years ago it was like 3 something, and I was like, oh man, that's $2 more. Like, it may not seem like a lot, but that adds up for like paycheck to paycheck.
Once things started getting scary, we left the building and bumped into Brian.
I definitely support Donald Trump. I feel like there was more money in my pocket when he was president, and I just don't believe that the Democratic Party is really going to change anything.
People here are worried about their money. For young voters, the next president will have to make it a priority. Jordan Kenny, BBC News, Pittsburgh.
And that takes us to a look at the weather prospects as we approach the weekend. Darren Bett, hello.
And if you want to continue watching the BBC News at 10, please turn over to BBC One, or you can watch on iPlayer. Next, it's Newsnight.
US election. Forget the undecideds. What counts now is persuading the unmotivated to vote. We ask an influential pro-Trump activist, will culture war rhetoric give Republicans the edge? And we speak live to Georgia's Secretary of State and top election official Brad Raffensperger, the man Donald Trump pressured to overturn the 2020 result. Does he fear a repeat this time around? Hello and welcome to Newsnight, the home of US election insights and interviews. Later on, we'll talk to an election official who was harassed and threatened the last time America chose its president. What are his fears for next week? Also on Newsnight tonight, Gabriel Gatehouse, host of the critically acclaimed Coming Storm podcast, who's got plenty to say about the culture wars. Anne McElvoy, host of the transatlantic Politico podcast Power Play. And Bonnie Greer, Democrat-supporting playwright and author. And first, I think we should have a listen because Donald Trump is speaking live right now in Michigan. And I think, well, actually, I say he's speaking. It looks like he's actually dancing more than speaking. Perhaps he's finished speaking. He's been on his feet, I think, for at least an hour. And that is a Trump rally there as we come to the final few days of this election. 4 days to go. And Donald Trump, well, we can see the back of his head there. And a lot of people waving.
You know, he plays YMCA, and nobody's told him that the song is a parody of all the ideas of manhood that he encapsulates. No one's told him.
Well, maybe he just enjoys it. Anyway, certainly enjoying himself right there. Thank you, Bonnie. We're going to be talking to you again in a minute. But first, we do want to talk about Donald Trump's strategies to motivate voters on Tuesday. Let's get insights from Robbie Starbuck, a former Hollywood music video director turned conservative activist who is well known for campaigning online against some major American brands' diversity and inclusion initiatives. Hello, Robbie. Welcome to Newsnight. And before we get to that, you back Donald Trump. You have a huge following online. What's your view on what you think it will take to motivate people to turn out for Donald Trump in the next few days and indeed on Tuesday?
You know, I don't think it's going to be very hard to motivate people. They've experienced what 4 years of Kamala Harris's leadership looks like. They've been paying more at the pump. They pay more for their homes. They pay more at every single service that they could possibly conceive of. People are sick and tired of the economic breakdown that has occurred under her watch and Joe Biden's watch. They've watched our border get overrun with millions upon millions of illegal immigrants who have not been vetted. Many of those illegals have turned around and murdered U.S. citizens, raped U.S. citizens. I think people have had enough, and they're looking to return to some semblance of normalcy in America. And
of course, she would say that she tried, Joe Biden tried to sort out the border issue, and Donald Trump blocked it.
That's just incorrect. A fundamental misunderstanding of how everything works. When Joe Biden took office, there were executive orders that were currently in place that Trump had used. We had the Remain in Mexico policy. We had a whole host of policies that were controlling that action at the border, and they rescinded them on day one when they walked into the White House. They didn't even try to fix this problem until millions upon millions, a record number of illegals had entered our country and killed young people like Laken Riley.
Okay,
and they
so
did it just before an
I'm,
election.
I'm just going to interrupt you to say, what I'm picking up from you there is that you are saying the key issues in this election are the economy and immigration. I do want to also talk to you, of course, about your campaign targeting big companies over their policies on diversity and inclusion. I mean, many people, certainly over here, I don't know about in America, but many people might just think diversity and inclusion, they sound like good things. What's the issue?
That's if you're looking at the top line definition of the words. Nobody's arguing that being tolerant of people or having diverse thought or anything along those lines is a bad thing. I myself am a minority. My mom is actually a refugee from Cuba who fled communism and lost everything to the communist regime there. So under the terms of DEI, I would be given favored status, right? But I don't want it. I don't need any sort of leg up from the government or from major corporations to say, you know what, you're Latino, so you deserve to have an easier time getting a job, or your kids deserve an easier time getting into school because they can check a box saying they're Latino. That's wrong. And frankly, many of the DEI programs, they're just simply Trojan horses for left-wing values. And in many ways, the programs have been explicitly anti-white. We've seen this already in our court system with many people winning cases already because of policies that were just strictly anti-white and discriminated against a race. I don't care what the race is.
Many people would obviously say that these are addressing underlying inequalities in the US, but these are huge US companies that you've taken on. It's Ford, it's Harley Davidson, it's the owners of Jack Daniels, and only yesterday Boeing. These household names that are changing some of their policies because they see this, well, is it because they see this as an issue that voters care about? Is it an election issue, this?
Yeah, it is. Frankly, people have also had 4 years of seeing what a DEI administration is going to do in their corporate workplace, because you don't need to control the means of production if you control the minds of the people who are in charge of production. And that's precisely what has happened with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in the White House, is major corporations, in seeking to appease the administration or seeking to get government contracts where they require you to have certain DEI programs, have had to install these programs, and they've pushed nothing but rabid leftism on the American worker. And frankly, workers are tired of it, and they've seen it in their kids' schools too, where, you know, their daughters are having transgenderism shoved into their sports, and they can't go play a sport without having a biological male winning a medal instead of them. So
I mean, obviously these are highly contentious issues. There are people who'd obviously strongly disagree with what you're saying, but I am interested in whether you think this election boils down to what many people would view as a culture war.
I think culture war is a word the media likes to use, but in reality, for normal people, these are everyday issues. You know, I just interviewed a mom not long ago whose 13-year-old daughter started to believe she was transitioning in high school. And shortly after that, the state of California took custody of the daughter. And you know what happened to the daughter? In the custody of California, they transitioned the daughter without parental consent, and the daughter committed suicide. So clearly, the state of California did not have the best interest of that child at heart. The mother did, and the mother is heartbroken and trying to get justice so this never happens to another child.
I mean, we obviously don't know the details of that case. What I would say is that the US LGBTQ+ advocacy group, which is called Human Rights Campaign, they describe you as a political bully, an election denier, and talk about you as a MAGA bully, a Make America Great Again bully. What's your response to that?
I'm not even sure how that makes any sense, but bizarrely, you know, with the HRC, I think it's probably the most Orwellian name you've ever heard of. It's like writing a bill that says, you know, We're Gonna Save Puppies Act, and then in the actual bill, it's like, yeah, if you vote yes, we're gonna murder puppies. It makes no sense. Nothing they do has to do with human rights. It's about pushing rabid leftism on America, on corporations, and they're the ones who forced in policy sets in these major corporations that have resulted in those companies paying to help get transition surgeries for children. Okay, so we're talking about in California, places like Kaiser Permanente have given double mastectomies to 13-year-old girls.
Okay, we're gonna stop talking about trans here because you brought it up a lot. But I am interested in, you know, usually conservatives say that companies should be left to direct as